The prairie night carried a silence so vast it could make a man forget he still had a voice out there beneath an expanse of stars that felt close enough to burn your skin. The only sounds were the wind worrying at the grass and the lonely creak of a lantern swinging on its hook outside the cabin. Inside, Silas Ward sat by the dying fire, his shoulders bowed forward, one hand absently rubbing the calluses of the other as if the roughness might just wear away with enough persistence. The chair beneath him was older than memory, pine-shaved and hammered by his father, and had grown to fit the weight of a man who'd gotten used to stillness. Silas hadn't always been a figure of silence. Years back, before drought and failed harvests, before the accident that took his brother and left him carrying 2 ranches worth of ghosts, he had laughed like any other man. But the land keeps its own kind of tally, and it had marked him harder than most. In town at Deadwood Crossing, folks whispered he was cursed. Some said no woman could bear to live with him. Others claimed the cattle he bred died too often, that the earth beneath his boots turned brittle because it resisted him. No one said it to his face. But Silas heard enough, and he carried their judgment like a burr lodged under the skin. He told himself he didn't care. Yet when the night stretched long, he sometimes wondered if the prairie had simply outlasted him. It was on such a night, the wind sharp with spring rain, that he saw her. Clara May Holloway stood at the fork of the road, her coat clinging heavy, the hem soaked dark. She had no lantern, only a Bible pressed tight against her chest as if its weight could somehow steady her. The rain fell in sheets, blurring her figure until she looked more ghost than flesh. Silas pulled his horse to a stop, lifting the brim of his hat. "You'll drown where you stand," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She blinked, startled, and he saw the lines of grief carved deep across her face. "I'll drown anywhere," she answered, her voice was thin, but steady. He swung down, mud splashing up the length of his boots. For a moment, they simply stood there, the storm wrapping around them like a shroud. Then he nodded toward the cabin's distant glow. "Best come on in." Clara hesitated. The town's women had spoken of Silas Ward with warning in their tones, as though a man's solitude were a kind of contagion. Yet what choice remained? Her husband lay in the ground barely 3 months. A cattle quarrel that left her with nothing but debts, and a name half the town wished she'd bury with him. She could feel the weight of every door slammed in her face that week, every whispered word. Widow, cursed, bearing a fortune. The Bible trembled in her grip. She stepped forward. Inside the cabin, the air was warm with smoke and old cedar. Silas lit another lantern, its light carving shadows against the rough-hewn walls. He offered her the chair by the fire. She lowered herself carefully as though uncertain if the wood would even accept her. Steam rose from her wet clothes, curling in ghostly tendrils. "Clara May Holloway," she said after a long silence as if declaring herself to the room might somehow anchor her. Silas gave a small nod. "Silas Ward." He poured water into a tin cup and set it in her hands. They sat without speaking, just listening to the storm beat itself against the windows. By morning, the prairie glistened with mud and the sky burned clear. Clara rose early, smoothing her hair back with a gesture more ritual than vanity. She expected him to send her away, but instead Silas handed her a pair of worn gloves. "If you're sit on working," he said. "The fence out back needs mending." She blinked at him, then at the gloves. "You'd have me work," he shrugged. "I'd have you stay busy. Seems better than staring at walls." And so began the rhythm of days. Clara worked clumsily at first. Her hands sore from years of household tasks, not ranch chores. But she learned quickly. She tied wires, carried buckets, chased strays. Silas spoke little, only correcting her with gestures or brief words. At night they shared meals at the same table, silence filling the spaces where laughter might once have lived. The town noticed. By the second week, whispers rose like smoke. In the mercantile, women pressed their lips thin and muttered, "Already living with him, a young widow with no shame." In the saloon, men snorted over their cards. "Ward's got himself a woman at last. Took in the cursed widow, a perfect match." The gossip carried itself fast as a prairie fire. Clara heard snatches whenever she went to fetch supplies. Once at the well, 2 matrons let their voices rise, so she couldn't help but overhear. "She'll never bear him a child. You mark me, some women are just barren by nature. That one, she carries grief like it's woven into her blood." Clara lowered her bucket that day with steady hands, but her chest burned. Back at the ranch, she worked until her palms blistered, unwilling to let Silas see how deeply their words cut. He noticed anyway. He noticed the way she lingered outside after sunset, staring at the horizon with a gaze too heavy for her years. One evening, he found her at the corral, arms folded tight against her chest. "They think I came to trap you," she said, her voice taut. Silas leaned against the fence rail, his face unreadable in the dim light. "They think many things." Her breath shook. "I didn't ask for this. This shame, this talk." He looked at her. Really, he looked and saw not the gossip's shadow, but a woman carved of endurance, too young to wear such sorrow. "Nor did I," he said. The words held no comfort, yet they settled between them like an understanding. Nights grew warmer. One evening, when Clara dozed by the hearth, Silas rose from his chair and laid a shawl gently across her shoulders. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his. For a moment, neither moved, caught in a silence not of emptiness, but of recognition. Then she lowered her gaze, fingers curling into the fabric, and he returned to his chair without another word. It wasn't love, not yet. It was survival, learning the shape of companionship. But survival could falter. The work and strain wore at Clara until fever caught her in its grasp. She tried to rise to prove her strength, but her body betrayed her. Silas sat through the nights, changing cloths on her brow, his rough hands unaccustomed to such tenderness. He remembered the town folks, words cursed, barren, and felt anger simmer low in his chest. When her fever broke, Clara wept, not from weakness, but from the weight of all she carried. In her tears, Silas glimpsed the truth. She had no one else and perhaps never would. He didn't speak it aloud, but something in him shifted. Then came the day she stumbled in from the barn, pale and trembling, clutching her middle. Silas moved toward her, alarm tightening his voice. I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought it was sickness or weariness, but it isn't." Her eyes glistened wide with a mix of fear and wonder. "Silas, I'm with child." The words dropped like stones into a still pond, rippling through the air between them. For a heartbeat he couldn't move. Then the truth settled, and his mind filled with a memory of every whisper in town. The cursed widow, the barren woman, the shameless girl. All wrong she carried life. Clara's hand shook against her dress. "It was before he died. My husband. No one believed I could." Her voice broke and she pressed her lips tight. Silas stepped forward, his face unreadable, his eyes burning with something she couldn't name. She braced for judgment, for scorn, but he only said low and steady. "Then the gossips have less ground to stand on." Her breath caught. She searched his face for cruelty and found only a kind of grave certainty. But outside, beyond the cabin walls, the prairie wind carried voices. The news spread faster than rain across dry ground. By nightfall, the town would know. Claire Holloway, widow, had swelled her belly under Silas Ward's roof.